Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Michaela Peters. We have a real dumpster fire going on behind me because I'm still waiting to move, and that's still not going to happen this week. And I was honestly pretty disappointed about this because I've already been waiting for such a long time. If I were going to live near my mom, I would be moving right now, and that was kind of the plan. But then I decided that that's not going to work because then I'm going to need to move again. Also, that place was like too small for all my stuff. It's terrible. I have a lot of stuff. Yeah. I really am an aspiring minimalist in terms of I really try hard not to acquire more stuff at this point, and it does not work. I wondered if I stopped traveling, if that would stop happening. I don't go shopping, so it's not like I'm regularly acquiring things when I stay somewhere where I already live. Okay, anyway, that's all like a very long, irrelevant interlude. I also went to sleep like very late last night, so I was like, oh, I'm gonna sleep in very late, and no, then I woke up at 7:30 and I'm like, what's going on here? I think I need to start getting blackout curtains. It's not even like it's that sunny out yet. I don't know. I've just been probably like too excited / anxious about this whole moving process, but then I'm like, no amount of being excited / anxious about it is going to make any of these people do their job faster, so let's remember that. Alright, so it's taken me a long time to decide if I want to make a video about this. Yeah, I have a million boxes behind me because that's what's going on. And I've decided finally today I'm going to do it because I thought about it yesterday. That's how it goes. And I do want to talk a little bit about BPD. Now, the whole thing is that obviously I do not specialize in this in a... How would I even explain this? Like, I'm not a medical doctor. However, the medical doctors who are dealing with this are mostly psychiatrists, so I'm not really sure most medical doctors are super well versed in the DSM. So I pulled it up here and we're going to discuss it today. And this is all going to be... Wow, look at this. My hair, it looks like there's a fan in front of me. It's just my window. Hilarious. Okay. This is going to be more just based on my own experience and based upon the fact that at a time learning about BPD was my autistic interest from approximately, it was 6 months long. And it's probably an ongoing interest, but one that I kind of, that becomes dormant when it's not super relevant to me. But I think yesterday I started thinking about it because I've had this period where I've had less satisfying interactions with people. I think a lot of it has been very, due to the fact that I've been focused on myself. Well, there are a lot of things I need to be focused on right now, mostly with the moving stuff. And that has thwarted my ability to connect with others, which made me think about how connection is sort of a double-edged sword, because while it can lead to great happiness, if not used correctly, it can really lead to great sorrow. And what does this have to do with BPD? Well, that's kind of the biggest issue with BPD, is that your desire for connection is so strong that oftentimes you can be willing to sacrifice parts of yourself that shouldn't be sacrificed really in any sort of situation, just in order to escape this real or imagined fear of abandonment. So I'm going to go through the DSM criteria with you, and again, I've expressed multiple times on this channel, I do / don't have a diagnosis for this, so I remain neither convinced nor unconvinced that this is something that is affecting me, which is, a reason why I had such an interest in it, in terms of trying to figure out why things in my life had become very complicated. And that was mostly an issue I dealt with in Finland, and the very difficult thing to admit about it is those experiences are something that in some very weird, messed up, masochistic way I miss a lot. Because it is very nice to feel very close with somebody. However, it is also good to keep in mind that it's not always emotionally safe or advantageous. So we're going to go through this, and I'm going to elaborate on each of these, and based on my, personal research, I guess, and life experience, I'm going to tell you my opinion on, what you can really do to help other people that you suspect may be going through these kinds of challenges. Rule number 1 of this entire discussion, though, and you will know this if you look at the Stop Walking on Eggshells book. One moment, please. So it is this book, Stop Walking on Eggshells, which I stole / borrowed from my family because this is in our house here. And I read this Well, I didn't read the whole thing. I read parts of it. I should read it. But I feel like I've spent so much time reading about BPD, I've moved on to reading about other things. Anyway, the point of this, what this is called is, or what it says here, is taking your life back when someone you care about has borderline personality disorder. Now, the thing to keep in mind is that the most unproductive thing that you can ever do is to tell somebody who you think has BPD that they have BPD. Now, why is this unproductive? Because you need to understand that the thing about BPD is that people who have BPD are usually suffering from incredibly low self-worth and just feeling bad about themselves chronically, regardless of whether they're aware of it or not. So what this happens is their ego defense mechanisms are so strong, they're very sensitive to criticism. This is common across a lot of personality disorders, also with narcissism. Fun fact, narcissism and BPD have a 40% comorbidity rate. What does that mean? That nearly half of people with BPD are also going to meet the diagnostic criteria for narcissism. Now, in my mind, people with BPD are a bit more innocuous than narcissists. I feel like narcissists can just be like legitimately mean and not empathetic at all. The issue with people with BPD is a lot of times they're like so empathetic that it's like dysfunctional. Because, all right, I'm going to explain it this way. This is everything I've learned from reading about this for a long time. There are two types of empathy, in case you didn't know this. There's cognitive empathy and there's emotive empathy. What is the difference? Cognitive, as you may have guessed, has to do with cognition and therefore thinking and thoughts. So it is when you can conceptually understand that there is something difficult that somebody is going through, but you are not emotionally taking it on for them. So emotive empathy, therefore, is the opposite, where when somebody is expressing their feelings, instead of just understanding that it's difficult for them, you physically feel it. So what does this lead to? A lot of exhaustion on the part of the person who is exhibiting emotive empathy. Now, this is a huge problem with people with borderline, because, yes, they're going to feel that, oh, if somebody else has a problem, it is my problem. No. And I personally suspect that I have had to tell multiple people who have borderline that you are not responsible for my feelings, or people who are exhibiting traits, right? This is the other thing we need to understand, and this is something I've been told by a therapist, is that we have to keep in mind that, you know, we all to some extent exhibit borderline traits, but again, for meeting criteria, it's usually you have to meet like 5 out of the 9 criteria. So I'm going to go through the criteria right now, and we're going to sort of work through that. Number 1, frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment. Let's start with this one. So one of the easiest ways, I think, to disarm people who you may suspect with BPD is to validate them, which is kind of counterintuitive because the whole point of BPD people is that they're seeking emotional validation and that they will act in accordance with how to get this. So they can be seen as very needy, clingy, and attention-seeking, all of which tend to be perceived negatively. So the easiest way to disarm somebody is to just kind of reassure them that you're there and you're not really planning on going anywhere. Now, another thing to keep in mind is, you know, people have their own lives, people are busy, people's lives pull them in a million different directions. So it is realistically not possible for somebody to be there for you all the time. Now, I think the issue, okay, while this is not necessarily mentioned in this criteria, I will start, you know, this discussion about going through some of the symptoms with, I see one of the biggest issues with this disorder being the lack of boundaries between self and other. What does that mean? Well, what I essentially just said a moment ago, which is that you are not responsible for somebody else's feelings. Like, borderline people tend to forget that they end and another person begins. And you're like, well, how does that work? This is especially a big issue with people who have borderline, who have children, because while, you know, all parents to an extent put pressure on their kids to like live through their unfulfilled dreams and get them to behave a certain way, this is a lot more exceptional with people who have borderline. So this can result in a lot of, shaming, blaming, criticizing, name calling, all things that are going to do what? Perpetuate the cycle, lead their kids to have low self-worth, and therefore, risk developing the disorder themselves. I actually just read an article yesterday that I thought was very interesting that talked about how BPD is now being understood more so as being a disorder that is linked to trauma and neglect in childhood. And it's actually very closely linked to different attachment styles, which I am thinking about making a video about that later. I actually went to the restaurant yesterday and was talking to somebody a little bit about this, and I didn't realize how much it's not just as common knowledge as I thought it was. So people with borderline most often always will exhibit a disorganized attachment style, which only 5% of the population has. A statistic I read yesterday said that 1 in 100 people have borderline. That's still a pretty significant part of the population, although it's not, very great. It's actually a bit less than autism. Yeah, that's also a whole nother debate, is that, misdiagnosing people, especially women with BPD versus autism versus ADHD, is very plausible due to the emotional dysregulation factor that comes as a result of it. Now, in terms of different ways that you can treat BPD, unfortunately, there aren't really too many other than the ones that treat pretty much every other psychiatric issue, which is medication, therapy, and different types of therapy like dialectical behavioral therapy, which is really aimed at targeting challenging your beliefs. I think that the most, and I've talked about having taken a DBT class myself, and I think the most useful thing about DBT classes is, here's the thing. BPD people have this incredible bias to be like, I always know what other people are thinking and what's going on. You don't. So we did this thing in class where it's like, look at me and tell me what I'm thinking. And the answer is you don't actually know, right? Like, you can make up something and you can make assumptions, but like at the end of the day, those are assumptions. And there's the whole, what happens when you assume thing, which I'm not going to repeat here because I think profanity makes it so that I can't monetize or something. So I'm going to not do that. Profanity varies from different country to country because there are some words in England that are not swear words or curse words, whatever, in the US, and they are there. All right, I'm digressing as usual. Okay. So, yes, it's difficult with children because I'm going to give a very borderline quote that has been said to me by other people, which is that a child is an extension of me, and therefore their child is also an extension of me. No, this is not correct. Your child is their own person. Just because you gave birth to them does not make them an extension of you. It makes them genetically related to you and could result in similarities. However, that does not make them you. Yes. Okay. So, frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment. I find that the easiest way to disarm this behavior in terms of dealing with somebody with BPD is just reassuring them that you're not going anywhere, that you're going to keep having a relationship with them. And, I don't mean this necessarily in a romantic sense. This can be family member relationships. This can be friendships, whatever. Like, you're going to keep being in the other person's life. This kind of tends to disarm them. This can be especially difficult in romantic relationships because a lot of times the person is just going to keep pushing and want you to kind of keep fighting for them to be in your life. It's exhausting, like, honestly. And I wouldn't even necessarily disagree that I have not done this in relationships. I'm pretty sure I have, because I have felt this way before. Yeah. A pattern of unstable and intense interpersonal relationships characterized by alternating between extremes of idealization and devaluation. What does that process look like? Somebody meets you. They start connecting with you very quickly and easily. Happens to me a lot. This is why I'm a YouTuber, I guess, or like what am I called, an influencer? Yeah, because people are like, wow, Michaela, I don't know, when I'm talking about myself in third person, it's always Michaela. Michaela is so relatable. Like, she's so open and honest. And, people like have this very like idealized perception of me, which again is dangerous in and of itself. And I do notice this creates an issue if like, I don't know, I'm going to say God forbid, no, but like, if I do connect with people from the channel, a lot of times it's like, once they eventually get to know me, I am not going to be able to continue to meet their idealized version of me because I, like all other humans, have deficiencies. And so this concerns me a lot when I first meet people who really like me, because I really do not think I am as honest and forthcoming about all of my thoughts and feelings as people for some reason think I am. So it usually takes a while to get to know me, and there are parts of me people are not going to like. Aside from having, perceived relationship difficulties, a lot of this goes into my beliefs, which are very, what is even the word? Like, juxtaposed. Yeah. I've talked about this before. It's like, being very secular yet very religious at the same time doesn't really go into a black and white box, and people don't like that, especially people with BPD. So there tends to be a lot of black and white thinking left over from childhood that never really got resolved. And this is common. Like, kids are very black and white in terms of their thinking. They kind of need to be in order for their survival. Another interesting thing, I'm just going to side note this, that I've learned in a TED Talk recently, is that children are so good at maintaining a positive image of their parents that they are willing to blame themselves, and they don't do this consciously. This is a defense mechanism. Let's think about this. I'm a child. I need to be fed, clothed, and sheltered, and who's the only person who's going to do that for me? My parents. So if I think that my parents are bad people and I need to get away from them because they're abusive, whether it's emotionally or physically, etc., I don't really have an option. Maybe I could tell a counselor at school and get child protective services to take me away, but there's no guarantee that that's going to be better. Also, it's necessary to understand that BPD or not, children naturally crave the validation, praise, and acceptance of their parents. So if the parent is very, criticizing of the kid and a bunch of other, negative things, emotionally volatile, invalidating of the kid's feelings, this is going to lead to a lot of feelings with the child. And this, could potentially put the child at risk of developing borderline themselves. So this is an issue with why it tends to run in families. They say that it's like a 75% rate of, if you have it, there's likely somebody in your family who has it. Okay, so yes, idealizing people and then devaluing them, it's not very productive. Especially in romantic relationships, this can tend to happen quite a bit because, of course, everybody's so in love at the beginning, and then eventually you realize that that is just a person with their own flaws. Can you live with this? And a lot of times, borderline people will be like, no. So they do have a tendency to hop pretty rapidly between different relationships, basically due to that primary reason, and due to the fact that there's just a lot of relationship instability, which can lead the relationship to end either on their part, where they're trying to abandon the other person before they feel abandoned, or the person they're with will ultimately break up with them and then they feel abandoned, and then to stop feeling abandoned, they look for somebody else. So I'm not going to say that all people who relationship hop or serial date, as I call it, are borderline, but there could be a correlation. Number 3. Identity disturbance, markedly and persistently unstable self-image or sense of self. So this is where I fail personally in the diagnostic criteria. And when I went for my neuropsych eval, I asked this woman 101 questions about why I did not have BPD, and this was the biggest reason why I didn't. So I like to call BPD people social chameleons. Like, they're pretty good at just fitting in socially. I try not to offend people with my radical views right away. I'm not sure if that's really the same as doing this. So yeah, it's sort of like, are you willing to compromise on your beliefs and values, right? Those are parts of your core being, just to be accepted by one other person or a group of people. That's a pretty big BPD thing to do. So my observation has been that likely people with BPD are people who are going to make pretty radical life changes, like randomly and kind of often. I'd say with people I've suspected historically who have had this, like if I think back to my own life, it's like, I'm going to become vegan. No, now I'm going to do this. And now I'm going to shave my head. Okay, well, maybe not that part, but just like a lot of very like random, rapid changes that are seemingly unlinked to anything, really. I'm trying to think of some better examples, but one person I think of who I grew up with, it was much more like, I'm going to get really into being vegan, and then I'm going to, like, move across the country or something like that, That could be a thing. I don't know. I can't really think of... Why is this difficult to think of examples? I think also, like, another thing to keep in mind is that there are people in, like, academia or people who are very, like, well-functioning in the world, right? Like, who, I don't know, you could be, like, an executive at NASA. Like, just because you're successful, it doesn't really shield you from being affected by something like this. Because you have to keep in mind, like, this is coming from your past, like, your childhood, like, how you've seen relationships modeled. And I also made a video on why most most, what is it, like high achievers, yeah, have low self-worth because you're trying to like prove something. Now you can also like have the double whammy where you have low self-worth and you're not really doing anything with your life. That's not really productive either. So yeah, but I think it's important to remember that, you know, self-worth comes from being a good person. At least this is my opinion, because, you know, I've said this, it's like, who are we without, you know, functional relationships in our life? That's what gives life meaning and purpose, ultimately. All right, number 4, impulsivity in at least 2 areas that are potentially self-damaging. For example, spending, substance abuse, reckless driving, sex, or binge eating. Yes, binge eating. I feel very fortunate that I've never developed an eating disorder myself. There's a book I have that I love called Reviving Ophelia, and usually people who are at risk for developing eating disorders are mostly teenage girls who are perfectionistic, which I really was when I was young, and I was like, wow, I'm so lucky that I never developed this. I used to read about eating disorders a lot, because they're very dangerous, right? Like, they can kill you. So anyway, that one's not surprising that's on here. Reckless driving, I would say that's probably more common in men. Sorry, but that's probably true. It probably has to do with the testosterone thing. Spending, yes, especially if it's your husband's money and you don't work. Substance abuse, right? This could be drinking and, I mean, other substances. Sex, yeah, because that's also, you know, something that releases similar chemical reactions in your brain as doing drugs. So yeah, impulsivity, so keeping in mind that this is just like doing these things not very appropriately and often and in situations where it would not be wise, right? That is essentially what reckless driving is. So why does this happen? And so this is where it starts getting a little bit complicated comparing it with ADHD, because the idea is that your prefrontal cortex is not really working as it should be, so your ability to inhibit undesirable behavior can be difficult, which, keep in mind, is even more difficult when you're drinking. And, you know, getting to a point where you're doing these things, yeah, is generally meaning that that part of your brain is going to be impaired. So if you think about if you're drinking, for example, and then your prefrontal cortex is already being, you know, messed with, you may be more likely to engage in reckless driving, which obviously you should not drink and drive, but that is a big problem in America. Luckily in Europe, not so much. That's why we don't have cars there. I love it. I was actually thinking about that this morning. I was like, I love not having a car because it is so much cheaper. Can't do that here. I wish, man. I hate driving. Okay, yeah. All right. I just feel like this one makes sense, so we're going to skip to the next one. Number 5, recurrent suicidal behavior, gestures, or threats, or self-mutilating behavior. Yes, cutting, that is a problem. I also don't really get that one. Feeling suicidal, yeah, I mean, this happens, and I think that the most important thing to keep in mind about suicidal behavior, gestures, and what was the other thing that it said? Threats, is that a lot of times it's a cry for help, right? To me, it's sort of like, this is a really terrible thing to compare to, but like, why do people cheat in relationships? I've also spent a long time trying to understand this. I personally don't entirely get it. But a lot of it has to do with the fact that somebody's needs are not being met, and it's a cry for help. I feel the same way about suicidal gestures or threats. Yes, because you don't really want to be dead. You just want to stop feeling whatever intense, terrible feelings you're feeling, which is, again, where medication management can come in, because that can kind of like level out what's going on in your brain. However, it's not a substitute for addressing underlying issues like beliefs, and that's where DBT comes in. The thing I love about, CBT, the other one, cognitive behavioral therapy, is this concept that people cannot make you feel a certain way unless you want to. So, just because you may feel like somebody makes you feel a certain way, they're really not. It's your interpretation of reality and the situation that is making you feel that way. I think it's important to pay attention to in what situations you feel good and what situations you feel bad. Now, I feel like those are very nondescript, yeah. But, I feel good exercising. I feel good walking in the woods. I feel good hanging out with this person. I feel bad when I don't get to exercise. This is this feels very obvious, but I do feel like that's important to also managing mood. for me personally, I've known my entire life, if I don't sleep or eat properly, then I can't manage my emotions. So sometimes if I'm low on sleep, I'm really just trying to get people to stay away from me. It's probably how I'm going to feel today, because I did not sleep much. Okay. Now, number 6. Affective instability due to a marked reactivity of mood, for example, intense episodic dysphoria, anxiety, or irritability, usually lasting a few hours and rarely more than a few days. Now, the reason why this is in here is to rule this out with bipolar disorder and, yeah, pretty much with bipolar disorder. So, fun fact, and I have said this in another video, the biggest difference between BPD and bipolar is that if somebody is in a psych ward, essentially, and you give them both lithium, if their mood automatically stabilizes, it's a bipolar thing, versus if it doesn't really do anything, it's BPD. Because the mood shifts with bipolar are really chemically induced, whereas the mood shifts with BPD they're really like random. Like they're linked to any of these other issues, like perceived abandonment, how they feel like a conversation went with somebody. A lot of it is linked to like how other people make them feel, which is why, again, like changing your perception or trying to overcome these cognitive distortions, as they're called, is really important. Like, oh, if somebody's not answering my messages, it means they're mad at me. Well, they might be. They might also just be really busy or overwhelmed and feel like they can't get through messages right now. You know, there's all that. So it's like not reading into things too much, which is a really big challenge that BPD people have. And I'd say another really big thing that I've noticed is that it's sort of like, this one person did this one thing to me and I'm really mad at them, so I'm going to stop being their friend. It's very childlike, but it is something that happens. And, you know, I get that over time, if behavior's kind of cyclical and this person keeps doing this thing, and then you're kind of like, you know, I don't think I really want to keep this relationship going. That's one thing. But I'm talking about, it's like you do that and then you're like kind of cut the person off for a while. There was something I had Googled about why do BPD people randomly disappear, like, as friends. And a lot of that has to do with they start feeling very emotionally overwhelmed, and they're trying kind of not to take that out on you, and so then they can just disappear. And that doesn't always mean there's an issue, is what I'm getting at. But, like, sometimes there is an issue, and then sometimes it's like a silent treatment thing, and they're trying to get you to figure out what you did wrong, and then come back and, like, rectify it. Or sometimes they're just, like, they just act like it never happened. So sometimes addressing issues within a relationship with BPD people, especially in friendships, can be pretty difficult. So yeah, like the whole like interpersonal aspect of it is where it gets really difficult. And this is another reason why there's an issue with the diagnosis between autism and ADHD, is because both of those have a lot of interpersonal challenges. Autism because you can't really like read social cues, and ADHD because your moods are also a little bit unstable and, you know, you can react impulsively. Like, you also have, again, that like prefrontal cortex deficiency. Like, you know, there are like things where they put people in brain scans who have these sorts of disorders, and it's like clear that certain parts of their brain are not normal compared to normal. Like, it may be shrunk or like not functioning as well. So like, yes, these things are like actually going on. So yeah, so it can be kind of different and difficult to maintain relationships with people with BPD, not even just romantically, but even friendship-wise, because it can be very unpredictable what's going to set them off, what's going to cause them to stop talking to you. Maybe they won't even provide an explanation. Maybe you offended them, but they don't want to tell you, and they just want to try to move on. So yeah, I mean, this again has been my observation of like kind of what's going on, but this is a little bit more opinion and anecdotal than scientific at this point. 7, chronic feelings of emptiness. This is a big one. Yeah, that's a hard one. So what do you do to combat that besides drink and self-medicate or something like that? Work a lot. You know, that's what I do. No, but seriously, like, this is a really big challenge. And that's why, you know, a lot of times people will be feeling down. People are like, oh, keep yourself busy. That's good. But to me, it's not really addressing the underlying chronic feeling of emptiness. And how do you address this? That's a good question. If you figure out the answer, please let me know, because I don't think I have. Yeah, I mean, it's hard. I think the chronic feeling of emptiness, and a lot of people say this, and, you know, this is my whole theory about why most people, like, want to be in relationships, is it's like, when you're alone at night, you know, that's when it really hits. I don't know, though. I really enjoy being alone in my bed at night and reading books, but no, there's, like, a certain, like, you know, people don't like to be alone. Like, humans were not created to be alone, and I think that's a big thing with BPD people, is it's like this being alone thing and not feeling socially connected. Because this is the other thing, is very paradoxical, and it kind of sucks, is like BPD people have like a stronger need for connection with other people than usual, but yet that connection, when too close, can like totally lead to destabilization of the person. And, you know, I think that the way I've found that I've been able to combat that risk is I call it a very wide friend rotation. So I'm very unwilling to get too close to people because it tends to explode. And that's also hard because, you know, people want to have close relationships. And then this gets into the whole introverted versus extroverted debate. And this is probably why I'm like really categorically neither, because it's like, while I do like being close to people, I understand there's a risk. And then a lot of times I'm able to get my social needs met by talking to a lot of different people. And, you know, while I've been in the relationships, like friendships, even where it's nice and we're really close and we talk all the time and I lean primarily on that person, it's one person. And if it's like putting all your eggs in one basket, and if they disappear, like, you're kind of screwed, like, emotionally, right? And this is also like why people go to therapists at this point. But again, you know, I talked about this in another video. It's like sharing your feelings can be, you know, like mutually beneficial when you have somebody that you can lean on and you can support each other, and that's kind of what best friends are. And to me, that's a lot more beautiful than just going to a therapist. But it depends what's going on in your life. It depends what's going on in other people's lives. You know, I'm kind of at this point where I feel like everybody that I'm friends with is also going through like really hard things, and me trying to talk to people about how I'm feeling is not really like kind, I guess is a good way of putting it. Granted, I don't even really know what I'm feeling right now, besides anxiety around moving out, but that's a separate discussion. Anyway, random side tangent. But yes, the chronic feelings of emptiness, it's a hard one, and it can be a hard one to admit to yourself and others too, but it is there. Okay. Also, I'm going to stop this discussion real quick to say something controversial and hope that nobody who's listening knows me well enough to feel targeted. And I can never guarantee that because I don't know who watches which of my videos. But people, a lot of times, who have BPD maybe don't even know they have it, you know, can feel very... How can I explain this? I'm trying to... Alright, words. Okay, I figured it out. Will feel very reactive to you talking about this stuff. So this is somebody who doesn't really feel like this applies to them, doesn't really know about it, doesn't care. They're not going to have like a really strong emotional reaction to it. But my observation has been that people who are exhibiting traits, right? I'm not going to label these people as BPD. I don't think that's necessarily fair because, you know, I don't have the ability to do that. Even though I really feel like I'm going to tell you, when you go to one of these people, all they do is do what I'm doing right here and pull this up and be like, aha, criteria, I guess no. And this is some of what my brother does. Also, people need to remember therapists cannot diagnose you. That is like, they're not allowed to do that, right? They're just as not allowed to do that as I'm not allowed to do that. Only psychiatrists are allowed to diagnose people because the purpose of diagnosis is for medication management. Now, a therapist could diagnose you because they need to put that on the records, but like they're not like allowed really to tell you that. It's just not part of how that process works. And you can explicitly be like to a therapist, do I have this? And then a lot of times they're just gonna like not give you an answer. Try doing it if you're curious, because I've done it and I can tell you it really doesn't work. Or sometimes if they really don't think so, they will tell you no, and maybe they'll be like, I could see it being more like this, but even then, they're really not going to even do that. Like, you know, I had one therapist for a while who talked to me about autism, and I never really understood that she was hinting at the fact that I had autism, and now looking back, that's probably what was going on. Alright, anyway, so yeah, people who are affected by this are a lot more like emotionally reactive to it. It's pretty interesting, and it's sort of like, you know, being in denial, because again, ego defense. What did I say about this book? Rule number 1 of talking to people who you think have BPD, do not tell them. It is not practical. It is not helpful. Labeling somebody as BPD, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it's only going to just make those people like, it's like poking a sleeping bear. Okay, just don't do it. It's not going to work. So I'm kind of here telling you, it's like what you can do is you can learn how to support these people. You can learn how to react to their sensitivities, you can learn to reassure them that you're not going to leave them. But beyond that, there's really like not a lot you can do. So, there are a lot of debates about whether BPD is curable. It's treatable, but is it curable, right? Like my brother's like, it's like cancer. It goes into remission, but it always runs the risk of coming back. So there is that. So, yeah, chronic feelings of emptiness. How do you combat these? Keep yourself busy? I don't even know. I don't know what else to say. Or you use other people to fill that void in your life. But I would also argue that neurotypical, or whatever we want to call them, like normal non-BPD people, non-trait exhibiting people, also use the presence of other people in their lives to feel less empty. So I feel like this is kind of a difficult discussion. Number 8, inappropriate, intense anger or difficulty controlling anger. For example, frequent displays of temper, constant anger, or recurrent physical fights. Yeah, obviously now we're getting into the abuse section, which I do not think anybody should tolerate physical abuse. Children don't always have that luxury. I hate saying that, but it's kind of true. And hopefully we're not still in an era where that's a problem, but I believe we still are, because I was not a child that long ago. And I don't know what most people know about growing up as an Italian kid, but maybe it's the same. Don't know. Anyway, I'm just going to throw that out there. Intense anger, difficulty controlling anger, displays of temper, anger. A lot of things that they'll say, in the mental health counseling space is that anger is a secondary emotion. They teach you this in DBT class too. And there's usually a feeling behind anger. I have a book on this. I kind of feel like referencing it right now, but I'm also like, how tangential do I want to get with this? So it can be, a substitute for feeling hurt, feeling, sad. Oh gosh, which other ones? It's more of a reactive emotion to another thing that you're already feeling that you're sort of covering up and denying. That's kind of the best way I can explain it. So, betrayed, hurt, I'd say in a relationship, this can manifest as something very jealous and getting upset that your partner did something that you feel like they shouldn't have done, and then you're just railing into them and not letting it go for like hours. That would be the best example I can personally think of. Keyword inappropriate, other keyword intense. Inappropriate and intense, that is being thrown onto somebody else. How do you diffuse this? Probably the same way I've already discussed. Try to remind the person, I am with you. I am not going to abandon you. You could say that word. I don't know that that's really going to help, but I value our relationship. I'm here because I like you. Like all these things. Because at the end of the day, people are more than their diagnoses. They're more than their personality disorders. Like, they still are a person, right? And so I feel like it is a little bit dehumanizing to objectify these people and then be like, I don't want anything to do with them. Because, again, it's like the argument is that every one of us could display at least some of these traits at different times. And you only need to meet 5 criteria to be diagnosed. All right, so then number 9, this is really the least relatable one for me. Transient, stress-related, paranoid ideation, or severe dissociative symptoms. So keeping in mind that there is a comorbidity risk, right, with different things like OCD, maybe some more paranoid symptoms like checking to make sure your door is locked 5 times. That's an OCD thing, though. Yeah, so yeah, I mean, that can also be a thing. But again, that's like the least relatable to me. So I think, like I said, a lot of it is just not understanding the boundaries thing, but in the context of, like, I'm going to give, like, other more pointed examples here. Gosh, a vaccination is, like, the only example I can think of, because that is a problem in my life. Not for me, but for other people in my life. Alright, let's say you have a friend, and I really hate giving examples because I feel so on the spot. Alright, you have a friend, and your friend is anti-vax, and you are not, and your friend is telling you all the reasons they're anti-vax. Dude, I also just feel like anti-vax is like a religion. Like, people really proselytize that. It's a thing. Okay. So, anti-vax. And you... Alright. your parent makes the decision about your vaccinations, not you. And let's say you're having a kid, and the anti-vax friend is like, you shouldn't vaccinate your kid. And then they tell you why. And then you're just like, okay. And then you go and vaccinate your kid anyway. And then they ask you if you vaccinated your kid. And then you're like, yeah. And then they're like, they get mad at you. That's like the best example I can think of, because it's like, just because you have this view does not mean that I have this view. And it's not really fair or right, in my opinion, to get mad at somebody for sharing a different view. Because at the end of the day, everybody is an individual, everybody is unique, everybody is different. Like, there is never going to be a person on the earth who was you that will ever live again. Like, you are unique. And it is impossible that everybody is going to agree with everybody all the time. It would make the world an easier place. It'd also make the world a very boring place. So, that to me is the biggest way to combat this, is just, I would advocate for respect in acknowledging that we all have different views. You may not feel very comfortable around somebody whose entire view and worldview, rather, that's what the word I'm looking for, or phrase I'm looking for, is different than yours. I personally am of the belief that I can have friends who have different views than me, but at the point at which I'm going to raise a child with somebody, that would require me sharing at least basic values with another person, because, well, I mean, it's raising a kid is already challenging enough, and then you're trying to instill values into your kid and affect and influence them. It's like the only person you actually like have that power of influence over. So you as two parents like should agree on what those things look like, and not everybody does that or like thinks about that, and it creates a lot of conflict, especially if like there's no ability to reach a consensus. So I'd say that's kind of like maybe a really big part of BPD, is like there's like a level of stubbornness where it's like you're not really accepting that other people can have different views and opinions than you, and if they don't do what you want them to do, like, it's okay. And again, this is especially dangerous when it's a kid, like when you're a BPD person with a kid. So that's why I believe, giving your kids their own sense of self, and, not ever being disappointed in their decisions. Like, I just think disappointment is a useless emotion. This is just me on a soapbox now. Like, people are going to do what they want to do. People are going to do what they feel like they need to do to live a happy, healthy, fulfilling life. And as far as I'm concerned, that's really nobody's business to judge except for God's, if you believe in God, right? So otherwise, I think that you should also just respect the fact that other people are going to do what they want to do. So I just find that, I said this to my mom one day. My mom got really mad at me when I was a kid because she was like, you were such a self-righteous jerk, basically. Without getting too into details, I'm just going to say I grew up, I was raised by two parents who wanted me to be raised religiously, but neither of which was really good at being religious themselves. Sorry, that's just how I feel. And it was a little bit difficult because, kids really don't like hypocrisy any more than adults do, but they really don't like it, especially when it's coming from their parents. And my uncle said something very smart to me where, well, he was like, kids are going to do whatever you do because they want to spend time with you. And I was like, wow, that's brilliant. That makes sense. And, kids a lot of times are just going to like copy their parents. I can't remember where I read this. So yeah, like whatever you're doing, they're going to do. Yes. And it's sort of the whole, it's ridiculous, but when people/parents say, do what I say and not what I do. Well, that's like not what kids do, right? It's like monkey see, monkey do. That's why that's an expression, and kids are gonna do that kind of stuff. So, my mom like thought I was super self-righteous and was giving her a hard time. Well, quite frankly, she wasn't really doing any of the things she was trying to teach me to do. So it was very confusing, right? And she still kind of does that. Whatever, doesn't matter. And I said to her later on, because this was a discussion more recently, I said, so take somebody who has low self-worth and who's religious, and what do you get? And she did not have the answer to this. And I'm like, a self-righteous jerk. Like, really, because you're sort of projecting the fact that you feel insecure in your own spirituality onto another person. And, I think this can happen in any religious community. I don't even think this has to be a religion thing. I think this can happen with anything that anybody feels insecure about. You can project that onto somebody else. Projection is a big thing with BPD people, because as one therapist told me, it is much less painful to project the parts about ourselves that we don't like onto other people. So I think, one of the other more difficult things about people with BPD, and I feel like I'll make this a whole separate video if I even feel like talking about this, is accepting less than ideal treatment in relationships. These people really run the risk of being in highly abusive relationships, whether physically or emotionally, because their sense of self and first off, gets so blended with another person that will happen in a romantic relationship, whether you're BPD or not, like some sort of blending of selves. That's why breakups are very difficult. You have to like reclaim your identity. It's like a normal person thing also. That's like not just entirely BPD. So the first aspect is that you have that, but also that your sense of self-esteem is so low that you don't even necessarily believe that you deserve better treatment. So another antidote for this is really being honest about what you will and won't tolerate and following through on things. And also understanding that if you break up with somebody, and as much as you want to get back with them, I remember one of my friends in Finland said this, and I always think about this. An ex is usually an ex for a reason. And reflecting on the reasons why that person is your ex is important. Your brain automatically does this thing when you break up with somebody where it's going to highlight all the good times and minimize all the bad times. It will sort of level out as you get emotionally further away from the inception of the breakup. However, it is still a thing that happens. Another thing that will happen is, and I learned this from like a neuropsych podcast, not neuropsych, neuroscience. Yeah, that is such a dope topic. Like, I wish I studied that in school, man. I wish I studied this if money were no object. So the corpus callosum connects both sides of the brain. I'm trying to remember which side it is. Hold on. All right. Without mentioning the specific brain parts, because I listened to this like 3 years ago and I'm already starting to forget, is that what happens when somebody dies, right? And like, I'm going to just also allude this to the death of a relationship, because this is particularly what was going on for me at this point. I had like a couple of friends who just like ghosted me, and I was like, what the heck? And this is why I've adopted this view of you don't lose people, you return people, because it's like people who are not going to stay in your life are not worth having in your life anyway. And if they're all like, we don't share the same views, all right, well, that's their issue that they even think that that's a problem, as far as I'm concerned, because you are entitled to be whatever person you want. And this again goes back to combating BPD point number 3. Don't have identity disturbances. Be who you are shamelessly and unapologetically. It's a great way to not end up in abusive situations. So there's 2 parts of your brain. There's one that is like keeps all the information present. Like, I live here. This is my social security number, all these things. Like, this is constant information. Then there's a side that updates and gets new information. And then these talk through the corpus callosum. And one of the issues is that there's also like this emotional involvement. So when you're receiving new information and it's updating this old worldview and you don't want it to, it's very difficult. And this happens a lot when somebody dies, and it's like, logically you're trying to update the information, but it's like kind of rejecting it because you don't want to accept the new reality. And that's very difficult. Very, very difficult, right? Like, I'm having to accept this new reality that I'm no longer going to be able to live in a house, and I'm trying to justify that it's going to be okay and I'm going to be happy with it, even though emotionally I don't think I really am. And part of moving on emotionally is validating your emotions and admitting them. And if you can't do that publicly, like on YouTube now, if you can't do that like publicly, like even to a trusted friend, then do it privately to a notebook or a therapist or some other outlet, because there's nothing worse, in my opinion, than invalidating your emotions, because that's emotional suppression and it's not healthy. Because what happens to emotions when you bottle them up? They come out in weird ways, and they're going to negatively affect your relationships for the rest of your life. If you feel insecure and unhappy about, feeling like you have some of these BPD traits, rather than just accepting it, moving on, working on it, it's kind of going to eat away at you for the rest of your life. So knowledge is power. I really believe that. And if you or someone you think is being plagued by these kinds of issues, there's no harm in continuing to self-educate and learn about it. There are so many videos on YouTube by people who are way smarter than me and who are actually psychiatrists, like Healthy Gamer GG. I always recommend him because I listen to him all the time. And, you know, you can read and you can learn about this stuff and you can make progress and advance and have a better life in the future in spite of all these challenges. Because what is life really other than overcoming one challenge after another? Like, life sucks and then you die. No, but legitimately it's like there is hope. And I think for me this is also why like having faith and religion is so important, because it's like I also like genuinely believe that like the solution to all these things is like beyond my control. So yeah, without getting into that, like, it's just that I really look forward to a time when these kinds of issues are not only not faced by me, but not faced by everybody else. And, you know, as they say in Russian, religion is opium for the people. Like, it's funny, but like, you know, it's kind of true. So it's like, whatever gets you through the day, man, whatever helps you cope, like, I encourage you to do that. And for some reason watching my YouTube videos is that for people, and I'm happy it can be, like, you know, that makes me feel like I'm contributing towards society in some meaningful way. But at the same time, I am getting to a point within myself where, you know, I think that it's been some time since I've been hurt pretty badly. I should probably get back out there and try to be friends with people again. But again, that is a PM problem, post-move problem. So yeah, now I need to start working and eat, and then I might try to go somewhere to do my work. But that's what I woke up thinking about. So I just spent a lot of time making this video, and I probably will not make a video this long again for a long time. But I hope it was interesting. I hope it was able to help at least one person. And again, if you're interested in this topic, I would encourage you to go to other resources that are not just me, even though I know a lot about this. All right, well, thank you, and until next time, bye.